Masjid Darul Iman. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward all of you for joining us here this afternoon. I know it's the first Ramadan afternoon, and especially for the men folk, we want to get in our qaylula in the afternoon and take a nap before iftar. So inshallah, we'll try and wrap it up as quickly as possible, inshallah, and focus on the main points. So as we all know, right, that in our deen, in our religion, right, what we call the arkan khamsa, the five fundamentals of our religion, which is shahada and testimony and belief in the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in the finality of the prophethood of Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And after shahada, it is the establishment of salah, and then giving charity from our wealth towards the poor and needy, and then fasting in the month of Ramadan, and then performing the pilgrimage for those who are financially able to. Now, the obligation of zakat is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned over and over again in the Holy Quran. Scholars say that in the Quran, the commandment and the injunction of zakat has been mentioned close to 80 times. And from those 80 times, 28 times Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions the injunction of zakat at the same time as He mentions the injunction and the obligation of salah. وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ. Establish salah and also give your zakat. So zakat is a fundamental part of our deen, fundamental part of our religion, and this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's system and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mechanism through which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, first and foremost, He purifies us. Zakat is a form of spiritual purification through which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He cleanses, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He purifies our heart from the love of this world, from the greed of this world, from greed of materialism. We live in a very materialistic world where everything is about money, 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 assets, property, right? We're always concerned about inflation, deflation. We're always worried about our dunya, right? And it is the dunya that has overcome our hearts. Through zakat, through sadaqah, through charity, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He purifies and He cleans our hearts from these evils and from these sicknesses. And at the same time, this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's system and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mechanism through which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He closes the gap between the affluent and between the poor and needy people who are also our brothers and sisters who live and share this world with us. In the current economic system that we live in, which is a ribwi-based system, an interest-based system, the system is designed in such a way that it is always increasing the gap between the rich, between the affluent, and between the poor and needy, between the working class. Whereas Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's system, the economic system that Islam has presented in front of the world, not only through zakat, but also through the iqtisadiyat and through the masail of buyu' and through the masail of business and commerce and transactions. And that economic system that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam has presented to this world is a system which is based on adl, is a system which is based on justice, it's a system which is based on equality, it's a system based on the constant flow of money. Money is always exchanging hands, and this system of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one that closes the gap between the affluent and the poor and the needy, right? Some scholars say that if all the Muslims in the world whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed with wealth, whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if every single one of them were to fulfill this obligation of zakat in its entirety, they were to give the full 2.5% that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has obligated upon them, then to a great extent it would solve the problem of poverty that exists in this world. So anyhow, the philosophy of zakat, the fada'il of zakat, the virtues of zakat, that's something that we can speak about in length, but that's not the purpose of this workshop today. Inshallah, the local ulama, the aimma over here, inshallah, can speak about that throughout the month of Ramadan. We're going to get straight into the fiqh of zakat, the masail and the rulings that pertain to zakat, inshallah ta'ala. So this presentation that we are going to be using today was prepared by Mufti Faraz Adam Al-Mahmoudi, who is a senior scholar in the United Kingdom, and he actually has an expertise in Islamic finance, in the rulings of zakat. He's also, mashallah, well researched in cryptocurrencies, digital assets, and things like that. And that's his field that he specializes in. If you Google him on Google, you'll have access to a lot of his articles, a lot of his research papers for those who are interested in this field. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward him for preparing this presentation, inshallah. So inshallah, we'll begin with the presentation. If I can ask Brother Junaid, inshallah, to flip the slides. Next slide, inshallah. What is zakat? So we can move on, inshallah. Linguistically, the word zakat means purity, praise, growth, blessing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He commands Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in the Quran, خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ صَدَقَةً تُطَهِّرُهُمْ بِهَا وَتُزَكِّيهِمْ. That take charity from their wealth, تُطَهِّرُهُمْ بِهَا, through which you can purify them and you can cleanse them. In Sharia, we have heard the word tazkiyah. One of the fundamental functions of the prophethood of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions in the Quran, رَسُولًا يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. Three fundamental functions of prophethood and nubuwah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions. Number one, يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ. That the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he relays the words of the Quran to the ummah and to the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum. وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ, and he purifies. One of his jobs is to make the tazkiyah and the purification of the hearts of the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum ajma'een from the sicknesses, from the diseases, from the illnesses of the heart. For example, pride and jealousy and greed and lust and many other desires that the ulama of ihsan and the ulama of tazkiyah and tasawwuf, they speak about. That was also one of the functions of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And third, وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ, to teach them the meaning and the understanding of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So zakat is a form of cleansing a person's heart. It's a form of purification, and it is also a form of growth. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he says in the hadith, "Ma naqasat malun min sadaqatin." That charity, it never ever decreases from a person's wealth. When a person, he spends, he gives in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether he is giving to the masjid, whether he is giving to an Islamic school, a madrasa, any other Islamic organization, whether he is donating towards a hospital, whether he is donating towards an orphanage, whether he is donating to the poor and needy, this will never reduce from the wealth. Rather, even though in terms of number, it might look as if his wealth has decreased by a certain percentage, by a certain amount. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He places barakah. Allah Azza wa Jal, He places blessings in that person's wealth, through which that lesser amount is of more use to that person than a larger amount in which there is no barakah. And that is why we believe that as Muslims, when we do not fulfill the obligation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed inside our wealth, when we transact in a manner, when we conduct business in a manner that goes against the principles of Sharia, then even though our wealth might increase in terms of number, in terms of its percentage, but in reality, there is no barakah, there is no blessing inside our wealth, and because of that, that wealth does not bring us any sukoon. That wealth does not bring us peace. That wealth does not bring us any tranquility. And that is why it is very, very important that each and every single Muslim, he fulfills the obligation, minimum, the 2.5% that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has obligated in our wealth. And then on top of that, whatever voluntary sadaqah, whatever voluntary charity a person he gives for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it will only add more barakah to a person's wealth. So linguistically, zakat means purity, praise, growth, and blessing. And the technical definition of zakat is تمليك بعض مال جزما عينه الشارع لفقير مسلم لله تعالى, to give a fixed amount of specified wealth to a needy Muslim for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Can we get the next slide, please? Where is zakat established? Quran says, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ. And as I mentioned, in 28 places throughout the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions both these obligations together, and from that we can gauge the importance that our Sharia has placed on zakat. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ قَدْ افْتَرَضَ عَلَيْهِمْ صَدَقَةً فِي أَمْوَالِهِمْ تُؤْخَذُ مِنْ أَغْنِيَائِهِمْ فَتُرَدُّ فِي فُقَرَائِهِمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it obligatory for the Muslims to pay zakat on their wealth. It will be taken from amongst the wealthy and given to the poor. Next slide, inshallah. The next slide for that, please. All right. Now, the conditions of zakat. Zakat is not a fard on each and every single Muslim. Rather, there are certain conditions that need to be met in order for this obligation to become compulsory on a person. Number one, obviously a person has to be a Muslim. Therefore, someone accepted Islam, someone converted to Islam at the age of 25, at the age of 30, he does not need to give zakat for all the previous years when he was not a Muslim. Rather, at the time of accepting Islam, if he is wealthy, if he reaches the threshold, the minimum amount required for the obligation of zakat to become incumbent on a person, then he will pay zakat on the following in the following year. Second condition is a person is an adult. And when we say adult, right, according to the Western definition, an adult is someone who, a legal adult is someone who reaches the age of 18 in some countries, who reaches the age of 19 in some countries. But Islamically, right, an adult is someone who reaches the age of bulugh, who reaches, puberty. According to Islam, that is the age of maturity, whether it is at the person of 12, 13, 14, right? That is when the ahkam of Sharia become obligatory upon a child. He is no longer a child anymore, he is an adult. And that's why there's researches out there that say that this whole concept of teenhood, right, and teenagers, this is a fairly new concept that that has just emerged in the last couple of 100 years or so. Whereas throughout history, right, when a person he reached the age of 12, 13, 14, he became baligh, he passes puberty, he was treated and he was considered an adult now. right? Back home, even many of you may be able to relate to this, that back home, many of us, when we were younger, at the age of 13, 14, 15, we started going out and we started earning for our families. We were running businesses, we were sitting in the stores, earning livelihood for ourselves and for our families. So even in Islam, when a child, he reaches the age of maturity, puberty, which has its own signs. A boy, he experiences a wet dream, or a girl, she experiences her haid, she experiences menstruation. Then he or she is now considered an adult. The salawat, the 5 times daily salah, are now farad and incumbent upon that person. If that person is wealthy, then that zakat is also obligatory upon that person as well, 1 year after the time that they reach the age of they reach puberty. And if there is a child, for whatever reason, does not experience any of the signs of puberty, then according to the lunar calendar, when that child reaches 15 years, then automatically he or she will be considered an adult. So 15 years according to the lunar calendar, according to the Gregorian or the solar calendar, will be considered 14 years and 7 months. So any child who reaches the age of 14 years and 7 months and has not experienced any of the signs of bulugh will automatically be considered an adult. So from this we understand that if a child has money, right, there is no zakat on the wealth of a child. Now, when our children are born, many times our family members, relatives, loved ones, friends, they gift our children some money. That money that is gifted to the children, that is the ownership of the children. That does not belong to the parents, that does not belong to us. What does that mean? That means that the parents are entrusted with that wealth. They have to keep that wealth safe for their children, and then when their children reach in the age of maturity, where they are able to understand how to spend their wealth in beneficial things, then then the parents will hand over that wealth to them. Or the parents can spend that money, but not on themselves. They can spend that money on their children. If it means they have to buy them clothing, or for their food, or for their school tuition, or for their diapers, right? Anything that the benefit is going to the children only, the parents can spend that wealth on their children. Now, a common question that a lot of people ask is, what about child benefits, right? The government, on a monthly basis gives child tax benefits to parents until their children reach the age of 18. So who does that wealth belong to? Does that child tax benefit belong to the children, or do the child tax benefits belong to the parents? The reality is that this is a bit of a tricky question, because the CRA guidelines does not explicitly or clearly mention who the owner of this amount is, these funds are. Is it the parents or is it the children? However, in England, right, or in England, the guidelines and from the government of England is very clear that the money is actually given to the parents, to support the parents, because when they have children, their children grow up, and obviously because children growing up, the children come with expenses as well, and that increases the burden on the parents. So as a means of support to the parents, the government provides X amount of money per month in order to support the parent. So here in Canada, what I normally tell people is that the parents, or whoever the recipient of the child tax benefit is, that person should make an intention. And they will make either one of two intentions. One intention is that this money belongs to my child, it belongs to my children. I am not the owner of this wealth. In that scenario, right, that money will enter the milkiyah, it will enter the ownership of the children. Now the parents have given up their right to that wealth. They are no longer entitled to that amount that is coming in every month. Now they have to either keep it as a trust for their children when they grow up, or they can spend it only on their children. And in that case, there is no zakat on that wealth until those children reach the age of puberty, they reach the age of bulugh. The second intention the parents can make is that this money is ours. We will retain the ownership of this wealth. In that case, if they are retaining the ownership for themselves, technically they can spend it on whatever they want. They can spend it on the children, they can spend it on themselves, they can spend it on household costs, they can spend it, they are at liberty to spend it however and wherever they want. However, in that scenario, that will be considered their wealth, and they will be obliged to pay their zakat, to pay zakat on that wealth every year. The third condition is that a person should be in a state of sanity. So that means a mentally challenged person, a person who is considered insane, a person who is considered majnoon. He is not able to differentiate between right and wrong. He is not able to make correct choices. There's a definition of majnoon, certain mental health challenges that people are faced today. For example, bipolar disease, or other forms of mental health challenges. These need to be assessed individually by scholars, and scholars will then say whether this mental health illness reaches the state of junoon. And if it reaches the stage of junoon, then a person is no longer accountable in the eyes of Sharia. Right? Salat and zakat, fasting, etc., is not fard and obligatory upon such a person. But again, it's a mufti or a scholar. He will individually assess different people's situations. Number 4, the fourth condition is that a person is the owner and possessor of wealth equaling nisab. What is nisab? Nisab is the minimum threshold, right? Which determines whether zakat is obligatory upon a person or not. What is that nisab? Inshallah, we'll talk about that in the coming slides. And the fifth condition is that a person, he owns nisab, he owns the amount of nisab for a full lunar year. And inshallah, we'll talk about that in the coming slides as well. Next slide, inshallah. Okay, so nisab. Now, in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he had set a nisab for gold and a separate nisab for silver. And the reason for that is, in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, both gold and silver were the common standards for exchange. That was what was used. Gold and silver was used for trading and for buying and selling. So you can consider gold and silver the two common currencies that existed in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the gold nisab that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam set was 20 dinars. And 20 dinars is equivalent to 87.48 grams of gold, or its equivalent in cash. And the nisab of silver that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam set was 200 dirhams. And 200 dirhams is equivalent to 612.36 grams, or its equivalent in cash. Now, I did the math this morning. I converted 87.48 grams into cash, and the amount I got was $6,745. So somewhere close to $7,000 or $6,500 is the nisab of gold. And the nisab of silver in cash is $604, which is roughly $600. So as you can see, that the nisab of gold is almost 15 times greater than the nisab of silver. Now, in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there was no difference between 20 dinars and 200 dirhams. The purchasing power was the same. If you could buy 10 goats for 10 dinars, for 20 dinars, you could also buy 20 goats for 200 dirhams. The value of both the nisabs were the same. Both the nisabs that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said were proportionate to one another. However, as time passed, the value of gold went higher, the value of silver decreased. And now, as we can see, that the purchasing power of gold and silver is totally different. 87.48 grams of gold, $7,000. 612.36 grams of silver is $600. So now the question is that me and you, which nisab do we use to determine whether zakat is obligatory upon us or not? The widely accepted opinion is that a person goes by whatever nisab is more beneficial to the poor. What does that mean? That means that we use the lesser of the two. So the lesser of the two nisabs is obviously the nisab of silver, $600. If we go by that nisab, that means more people are paying zakat. And the more people that pay zakat, right, the more poor and needy are benefiting from the wealth of the wealthy. Right? So that has been the most commonly accepted fatwa up until recent times. In the current time, current era, there's also an alternative opinion that is also held by major scholars, and that is that in countries like Canada, where the currency is very strong, we will go by the nisab of gold. If we go by the nisab of gold, that means zakat is not obligatory upon a person until they own more than $6,700. Which means that a lot of people that were paying zakat and have been paying zakat all these years, it's very likely and very possible that they don't have to pay zakat anymore. Now, which one is the correct opinion? And also, it works in the reverse manner as well. The reverse manner is that if we go by the silver nisab, then a person who has $700, $800, $900, $1,000 in cash, that person is not eligible to receive zakat, right? And if we go by the nisab of gold, that means a person can have $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, even $6,000. But technically, because they own less than the nisab, right, they are still considered poor in the eyes of Sharia, and hence they are eligible to receive zakat. Whereas we don't consider anyone who has $5,000-$6,000 to be considered poor. So that is why generally what I say is that we should go and we should abide by the nisab of silver in general. Because even if a person has $600 only, right, 2.5% from 600 is not a great amount. It's not going to put a person on the streets, right? It's only $2.50 per $100. So for $600, it's only $12.50, right? So it's not a big amount, huge amount, right? However, in certain situations, in certain cases, for example, a person is going through a very difficult time. They're not able to afford food. They have debt on their heads. They're going to be evicted from their homes. They're going through a very rough patch. They have some amount of money in their account, maybe $2,000, $3,000, right? Which is more than the nisab of silver. But that $2,000, $3,000 is not going to even get them by the next couple of weeks. They're going to be evicted from their homes, and that $2,000 is going to be gone first month of rent, right? First month of rent, last month of rent, they have to give in advance. So that $3,000 is of no use to them. So in that case, right, that family, that whoever is in that situation will speak to a mufti, will speak to a scholar. That scholar will assess that person's individual situation and then can give that permission to abide by the nisab of gold. All right. So again, the nisab of gold and silver are drastically different, but in general, we will go by the lesser of the two. Moving on, there's a little bit of detail again that I forgot to mention earlier, is that the nisab of gold and silver, if a person only owns gold, he doesn't have any silver, he doesn't have any cash, he doesn't have any business assets, right? In that situation, a person will go by the nisab of gold. Then he doesn't have to look at silver. If a person has silver, he has no gold, he has no cash, he has no business assets, and in that situation, a person will go only by the nisab of silver. However, when a person has mixed assets, he has gold and silver, he has gold and cash, he has silver and cash, he has gold and business assets, silver and business assets, any combination of different assets, then a person will go by what we mentioned earlier, a person will go by the lesser of the two. Okay? So, speaking in our context, if a person owns $604 or more, that person is called Sahibun Nisab. He is the owner of Nisab, and if he maintains Nisab for 1 lunar year, then when 1 lunar year passes, this person will take out 2.5% of whatever he owns after 1 year elapses. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Next slide, please. The cycle of calculating zakat. Now, the easiest way to explain this is that each and every single one of us should have a zakat date. Okay? We should have a zakat date. You can call that your zakat anniversary. Now, generally people, they take out their zakat in the month of Ramadan, and they consider the 1st of Ramadan or the 15th of Ramadan to be their zakat date. Technically, that is not correct. A person's zakat date is the first time that a person became sahibun nisab in his life. So let's say a person, he becomes baligh at the age of 14. At the age of 15, he starts his first job, and he gets his first paycheck of $1,000 on the 1st of Muharram. His zakat date is the 1st of Muharram. Okay, let's say it's the year 1442. 1st of Muharram, 1442. That is his zakat date. Now, when 1 year passes, the 1st of Muharram, the year 1443, if he still owns the amount of nisab, anything greater than the amount of nisab, he has to take out 2.5% of whatever he owns on the 1st of Muharram, the year 1443. In the middle of the year, his money can go up and down. It doesn't matter. Right? A lot of people, they have this misconception that if I take out my zakat, for example, on the 1st of Ramadan. Now, 1 month before Ramadan, I got $10,000 from somewhere, or I bought some jewelry. Do I have to pay zakat on that jewelry because I've only had it for 1 month? Right? The answer is yes. We don't look at what happens in the middle of the year. The fluctuation that happens in the middle of the year, there is no i'tibar of that. We only look at the beginning of the year and the end of the year. If at the beginning of the year you are sahibun nisab, at the end of the year you are sahibun nisab, then when your year ends, when your zakat date comes, when your zakat anniversary comes, that day you will add up all your assets, you will deduct any liabilities, and whatever the balance is, you will pay 2.5% of that in zakat. Now some people ask that I don't know my zakat date. I've always been paying on the 1st of Ramadan. Or for example, I haven't paid zakat for many years, and now for the first time, I'm going to start paying zakat now. I was negligent all these years. Now I want to pay zakat. In that case as well, the scholars say that ideally, you should try and go back, look at your bank statements or something, and try and figure out what day you first became sahibul nisab. However, if that proves difficult, and it is difficult for many people, then they can choose any date. If someone chooses the 1st of Ramadan, that's fine. But they have to be consistent, and they will have to go by the 1st of Ramadan every year. Now, the hikmah and the wisdom behind this is that poor people are poor throughout the whole year. People don't just become poor in Ramadan, right? So if everyone is only taking out their zakat in the month of Ramadan, calculating their zakat in the month of Ramadan and discharging their zakat in the month of Ramadan, then that puts poor people at a disadvantage throughout the year, right? When people have different zakat dates, some people are taking their zakat in Muharram, some people are taking their zakat out in Sha'ban, some people are taking their zakat out in Shawwal, right? So the poor people, their needs are being met and taken care of throughout the entire year. Ji? Oh, okay. So, number one, we all have our zakat date. The day you own the nisab amount, pencil this Islamic date in your diary. We should all have a diary nowadays. We have Google Notes and stuff like that, right? In there, we should keep track of our zakat date. We should keep track of our assets. We should keep track of our liabilities and things like that. That diary we should keep. Even things like how many fasts we've missed, right? And we have to give fidya for, or how many salahs we've missed in the past and we have to make up for it. We should keep these things and we should give somebody else access to it. So in the event that we are to pass away, right? Or we write it down inside our will that in the event we are pass away, our heirs, our family members who we leave behind, they can take care of they can take care of our obligations. So the day you own the nisab amount, pencil this Islamic date in your diary. It makes no difference whether the wealth increases or decreases during the course of the year. Yes, if you become bankrupt, you hit zero, right? So your zakat date is the 1st of Muharram. 4 months down the line, you hit zero. You become completely bankrupt. You don't own anything. Then what happens is your zakat date gets cancelled. 1st of Muharram is no longer your zakat date anymore. Now, the next time you become sahibun nisab, the next time you own the amount which is equivalent to the nisab, now you will have a new zakat date and now you will have a new zakat year. 1 lunar year later, if you possess the current nisab amount after deducting liabilities on that very same Islamic date, you must pay 2.5% on your wealth as zakat. This process will continue every single year. It will remain the same date, right? Unless you have wealth equaling less than the nisab amount. So let's say on the 1st of Muharram 1442, you were sahibun nisab. 1 year passes, 1st of Muharram 1443, you only have $100 of savings. You only own $100. Is that more than the nisab or is that less than the nisab? Less than the nisab. That means the year 1443, you don't have to pay zakat for that year. Now you will move on the year 1434. Understand? Next slide, inshallah. Now, what do we pay zakat on? We all own many different types of assets. However, all of those assets are not zakatable. Only certain assets are zakatable. Number one, gold and silver. All types of gold that you own, whether it's gold utensils, gold jewelry, gold decoration, gold bars, raw form, pure form, any form of gold. 24 karat, 22 karat, 18 karat, 14 karat, 12 karat, 6 karat. Zakat is wajib on all forms of gold and silver. And inshallah, we'll discuss that in detail as well. Number two, cash. Any type of cash that you own, whether you physically own it, whether it's in your bank account, whether it's in your checkings account, whether it's in your savings account, whether it's in an Rrsp, again, we'll talk about that stuff later on, whether you're hiding that money under your mattress or under your pillow, right? We'll talk about that as well, inshallah. That's coming up, right? So all types of cash that you own is zakatable. Number three, business stock. Business stock is anything that you have purchased with the sole intention of selling it. You purchased it with the intention of resale. And again, we'll be talking about that in detail. Number four, agricultural produce for people who own farms. I don't know about Toronto. Nobody in Toronto owns farms. When I was passing by, driving here, I saw a lot of empty land. Maybe perhaps some of you own farms and stuff like that, right? But for the most people here in Canada, don't own farms. Number 5, animals and livestock. People who have farms and they have cattle, horses, cows, goats, lambs, etc. Then there's a liability on that as well, but we won't be discussing that in today's presentation. Next slide. Non-zakatable items. So assets that we own that we don't have to pay zakat on. So jewelry besides gold and silver. So if you have plastic jewelry, titanium, platinum, copper, rubies, emeralds, any type of precious jewels, unless you purchase them with the intention of selling, there's no zakat on there. Cars, vehicles, boats, bicycles, you can have 100 cars, right? But you didn't purchase them with the intention of selling it, there's no zakat on your vehicles. Properties. Properties in of themselves are not zakatable. They become zakatable when you purchase it with the sole intention of selling. And again, we'll get to that in detail later on. So you purchased the land back home, you'll move there, when you retire, or you're going to put it on rent, right? But you have no intention you didn't purchase it with the intention of selling, there is no zakat on that property, even if you have 100 properties like that. Properties on lease. You purchased an apartment building, you purchased a house, and you're putting it on rent. It's producing income. You didn't purchase it with the intention of selling, you purchased it with the intention of putting it on rent. It's not zakatable. There's no zakat on that. Yes, the income that you make from there, you'll add that with the rest of your cash, and when your zakat date comes, if you still own it, you'll pay zakat on that, but there's no zakat on the actual property. Electronic appliances, household appliances, stove, fridge, refrigerator, AC, all these things, no zakat on any of that. Right? You own a car rental company, right? You have 100 cars in the lot, you're renting them out. There's no zakat on there because you purchased it with the intention of putting it on rent. Yes, you own a car dealership, right? You purchase cars with the intention of selling, right? Then there's zakat on the market value of each and every single one of those cars. Next slide. Gold, silver, and cash. According to the Hanafi school of thought, gold and silver, even if it's for personal use, even if it's just there for savings, right? You haven't touched it for years, right? There is still zakat on there every single year, right? Our wives, mashallah, they get a lot of gold at their wedding time, right? That gold, even if they've had it for 20 years, every single year, they will continue to pay zakat on that. Because by default, Sharia recognizes gold and silver as appreciating assets. White gold or any form of jewelry that is not full gold content, 12 karat gold, 14 karat gold, 16 karat gold, because jewelry is never 100% gold, because gold is very soft. Right? In order to make it durable, they mix it with other alloys. So generally it's 22 karat or 18 karat, or whatever the case may be. So gold is, zakat is wajib on that jewelry according to its gold content. Right? So the best thing that we can do is you take it to a Muslim jeweler. Most of the times, fi sabilillah, they'll value it for you and they tell you that all your gold is worth this much. Right? If we don't want to go to the jeweler and we ourselves are able, we know that this one is 22 karat, this one is 14 karat, this one is 6 karat, we can separate them. And then you go on the internet and you Google price of gold per gram by carat. Right? And it'll tell you that today the market value of 6 karat gold is $50. The market value of 14 karat gold is $60. And the market value of 22 karat gold is $70. Right? So then you will do your calculations separately for each of the different groupings of gold you have. You add the full amount together in cash, and then 2.5% of that you take out in zakat. However, gold-plated jewelry means, in Urdu we say, "Sone ka pani chadhaya hua," right? That it's not gold; it just has gold casing on the top, or just a very, very thin layer of gold on top. It's negligible. Sorry. Oh, mashallah, gold case, right? Gold plated, right? Right? So because the amount of gold in there is negligible, there is no zakat on that. Right? Moving on, zakat on business stock. Commodities or business stock refer to those items purchased with the intention of resale. Very important. You purchase something, and at the time of purchasing it, your full and sole intention is, I am going to sell this. I'm going to find a buyer and I'm going to sell it. Whether it's a bike, whether it's a phone, whether it's some food item, whether it's a property, anything that is purchased with the intention of trade, with the intention to sell it right away, you're immediately going to start looking for a buyer, then that becomes business stock. And when your zakat date comes, if you still own that, zakat is wajib on the entire value of that asset. What that means is if you purchase something not with the sole intention of selling it, you think to yourself, I'm going to buy it right now, let's see what happens. If the value goes up in a couple of years, then I'll think about selling it. Or I'm going to put it on rent right now for 5 years, 10 years. Then down the line, if the market goes up, then I will sell it. So you don't have a sole intention of selling it. Or you purchase something as a storage of value, because cash, the value is always depreciating. So you purchase real estate only with the intention that let it grow. Again, there's no intention of selling right now. Maybe, perhaps, if the market is right, you'll sell it in the future, right? Then that is not considered a business stock. There is no zakat on that property. There is no zakat on that item. Similarly with stocks. Again, we'll talk about stocks later on. Shares, you purchase shares in a company. One is you purchase a share with the intention that I'm going to sell it, right? I'm going to trade, short-term trading, right? You're not long-term investing. You're going to, within the next couple of weeks, as soon as the market is right, you're going to sell it. In that case, zakat is wajib on the total value of that share. However, if you purchase shares with a long-term strategy, what you call, purchase and hold, you're just holding it right now. You'll see later on, maybe you're purchasing it for dividends. You'll see maybe 5-6 years down the line, you hope that the market is going to fly and that stock is going to go up. So at that time, you'll consider selling it. So in that case, there is no zakat on the total market value of that share. Zakat is only on the underlying zakatable assets. And again, I'll talk about that in one of the next slides, inshallah. Now, when you have zakatable business stock, you have a store, right? You have a grocery store, you have a cell phone store, you have a car dealership, whatever the case may be, zakat will be calculated according to the retail price of the goods. However, that's if you're a retailer. If you're a retailer, then you are going to calculate your goods at the retail cost. If you're a wholesaler, then you will calculate the value of your goods according to the wholesale cost. Zakat is not compulsory on real estate purchased with the intention to lease out, with the intention to rent. One will add the value of gold, silver, cash, and the total value of goods and give 2.5% as zakat. So when your zakat date comes, you calculate your cash, you calculate the value of your gold, you calculate the value of your silver, you calculate the value of your business assets, you add it all together, you subtract your liabilities, and whatever the balance is, you pay zakat on that. Next slide. Yeah.
These people have corporations.
Yeah.
They're sole owner, but they own a corporation.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have to pay zakat on the assets of the firm?
Of course, that's coming here as well, right? So business, partnerships. Every partner is responsible to dispense zakat of his percentage share. So if you're a shareholder in a corporation, you own 25% of the shares of that corporation. You own 25% of that corporation. Then whatever the underlying zakatable assets that corporation owns, you pay zakat on your portion of that. So let's say there's a corporation, they own buildings, right? They own, they have some certain fixed assets, and then they have a certain amount of cash. That corporation owns a certain amount of gold, a certain amount of silver, and they own a certain amount of business stock, right? Now the total value of the corporation is $1 million. But the underlying zakatable assets that that corporation owns on their balance sheet is $100,000, right? So, and from that $100,000, you own how much of the company? 25%. So you will pay zakat on $25,000. Does that make sense? Yeah. So every partner is responsible to dispense zakat of his percentage share. Valuating business stock. Valuate finished goods at sale price. Unfinished goods will be valuated with the market price. Unfinished goods. So let's say, for example, you're a carpenter, right? And you make furniture, right? So you have a certain amount of wood that you have in stock as well that you use to make your beds, to make your dressers, etc. Or for example, you're a baker, you own a bakery, and you make cookies, you make cakes, and desserts, and you sell that. And you own raw flour, you own raw sugar, and other ingredients. Now, that sugar that you purchased with the intention that you're going to sell it, not in its raw form, but as a part of your final product. That wood that you purchased it with the intention that it's going to be part of the end product, the bed. So that sugar is zakatable, the flour is zakatable, and the wood is also zakatable. If it's unfinished, right, you value it at its unfinished cost. If you were to sell that wood on its own in the market, how much would you get? And the finished goods, right, that wood that is part of the bed now, obviously because it's a finished product, the value goes up. So you value that at its finished price. Okay. Yes, there's no zakat on machinery, right? So whatever your saw and whatever other material you have, or the baker, he has his blender and his other equipment that he purchased to use. He didn't purchase that to sell. So there's no zakat on any of that. Right? Common transactions that will. One thing I want to make clear over here before I move on, that in our families, in our businesses, ownership should be very clear. It needs to be defined who owns what in the house. Right? Many times, for example, a father, he starts a business with his son, or he starts a business on his own, but he's kept his son in the business right from the beginning. Now the son, he is of the assumption that I'm 50-50 in this business with my father. On the other hand, the father is thinking, no, this business is mine. My son is just my helper. He's my son, he's obligated to help me. Or I'm going to give him a certain amount of money at the end of the year, or whatever the case may be. Or the husband and wife, they both purchase a house together, right? Primarily, the husband is making the payments. Here and there, the wife also helps with the payments, right? From a Shari'i perspective, right? Or similarly, at the time of marriage, right? A lot of gifts are exchanged. Gold, silver is given from the husband to the wife, and sometimes from the wife also to the husband. So everything needs to be made clear. Who owns what? If it's a business, is the father and son going into a 50-50 partnership, 60-40 partnership, 75-25 partnership? Needs to be made clear. At the time of nikah, gold and silver, which is being given to the wife. In certain cultures, even in Pakistan and some parts of India, the gold and silver jewelry that is given at the time of nikah is not a gift, it's a loan. And in the event of separation, divorce, the wife is expected to give that gold and silver back. But because these things are not made clear, when somebody passes away, somebody dies, or there is a dispute, then it leads to a lot of commotion, and families get broken up and families get torn up, because of this. Even in the husband-wife relationship, The gold and silver that the wife owns, that's hers. It's her ownership. She is liable to pay the zakat for that. It's not the husband's responsibility. If the husband decides to pay on behalf of his wife, that's the mutual agreement that they have between themselves, and that's okay, that's fine. But the wife cannot demand that the husband pays her zakat for her. He's not obliged to do that. If she says, well, I don't have any other cash to pay my zakat, sell your gold. Then she has to sell her gold and pay zakat from there. Understand? So it's very important that we keep ownerships distinct. So common transactions, ijara and diminishing musharaka schemes. These are not considered as debt, therefore no future payments at all can be deducted from zakatable assets. For example, al-ansar, okay? You purchased a house through al-ansar, right? You put in 25%, al-ansar put in 75%. Right? Now the house value is $1 million. You put 250,000 in, Al Ansar put $750,000 in. You own 25% of the house, Al Ansar owns 75% of the house. Now every month you will be paying Al Ansar a certain amount of rent. That is Al Ansar's profit. That's $750,000. Is that considered a debt? Is that considered a liability that you can deduct from your zakatable assets? No, right? Because those are only rental payments. You can make those payments, right? And you're not, if the agreement is cancelled, Al Ansar, when you sell the property, Al Ansar will take their percentage of the profits, and you're not going to be making those rental payments anymore. So that's $750,000. You don't technically owe Al Ansar. You're slowly going to be buying those shares back in the future whenever you can. So in an ijara or diminishing musharaka schemes, that those shares that you intend to buy in the future, that is not considered a liability, that is not considered a debt. Deposits, money entrusted to somebody else, money deposited for safekeeping or given to another party for guardianship is zakatable. Right? I'm traveling somewhere, I gave money to my parents or my brother to keep for me. Right? He's just trusting it. That's still my money. If my zakat date comes, I still have to pay zakat on that. Down payments, right? A purchaser is not the owner of the funds forwarded in a down payment. Thus, money given as a deposit in a down payment is not subject to zakat. You entered into a purchase and sales agreement with somebody. The closing is a little bit later on, and you gave a down payment, $50,000, $100,000, right? That $50,000, $100,000 that you've given as an advanced payment, that has left your ownership. You are no longer, if your zakat date comes, you don't have to pay zakat on that $100,000 because that has left your ownership. Insurance premiums. Zakat is not payable on insurance premiums. You purchased a 1-year policy, you paid for the entire year at once, right? You don't pay zakat on that, that has left your ownership. Benefits, zakat is payable on the beneficiary of working tax credit, child benefits, and all other forms of social security allowances. If one possesses any of these benefits when calculating zakat, it will be added to one's gross assets. So any type of benefit that you get from the government, if you own it on your zakat date, right, you are liable to pay zakat. And we talked about the mas'ala of child benefits. If you made intention that it belongs to your children, then there's no zakat on there until your children reach the age of puberty. Okay. Now let's talk about debts. There's two types of debts. Debts that you owe and debts that are owed to you. Right? So we can call them, number one, debts that are owed to you, we can call them receivables, and debts that we owe to somebody else, we can call them liabilities. Liabilities can be subtracted from your assets, and receivables form a part of your assets. They are considered a part of your assets. Ruling: the creditor must pay zakat on the amount that he has lent. I gave money to a family member to help him purchase his house. I gave qard hasana to the masjid for some project that they are working on. The qard hasana that you gave to an organization or you gave to somebody, that is still your money. That is always going to be paid back to you. Right? So you are liable for its zakat. But over here we have two options. Right? Let me give you an example. It will be easily understood through the example. You gave $10,000 qard hasana to Masjid Darul Iman for a project, and you've given it to them for 5 years. Now this year, your zakat day, it comes up. Now you have two options. You can calculate how much zakat is obligatory on $10,000. So what's 2.5% of 10,000? Huh? 250, mashallah. So $250 is of zakat is obligatory in $10,000. So now that $250, what you could do is you have other money. So from that other money, you give that $250 in zakat and you forget about that liability. Second option is you don't have too much other money to, to offset the zakat of that $10,000 right now. So what you do is you defer the payment. So you say that the $10,000 that Masjid Darul Iman has, I have to give $250 of zakat in there, but I'm not going to pay that now. So you put it inside your notes, you put it inside your diary. And then after 5 years, when Masjid Darul Iman gives you your $10,000 back, then at that time, from that $10,000, for the 5 years they had it, you take out 250, 250, 250, 250, 250 for the 5 years that it was in Darul Iman's position. So with the first option, you offset it right now, and then you can forget about it. But in the second option, you have to keep track of it, and then when you get the funds back, you have to pay it for all the previous years. Does that make sense? Now, debt receivables, any money that somebody owes you, right? Is that zakatable or not? Right? The ulama have classified those type of debts into different categories. There's strong debt, there's weak debt. So strong debt is unpaid wages. You've worked for your employer, and for some reason he didn't pay you. He said, I'm going to pay you in 2 months. So he owes you that money. Now when your zakat date comes, you don't have to pay zakat on that money that is owed to you by your employer. That is considered a weak debt. We're not going to go into the technicalities of why it's a weak debt, but it's a weak debt. Unpaid rental for a landlord, right? You own a property, you put it out on rent. Your tenants, they owe you 3 months of rent that they haven't paid you. Your zakat, they owe you $3,000 in rent. When your zakat date comes, you do not have to calculate those $3,000 as part of your assets. That is considered a weak debt. Outstanding mahar payment. Right? When this is for the sisters, when they got married, their husbands, they stipulated the mahar, certain amount is mahar muajjal, which they gave right away, and one is mahar muajjal that I'll give later on. Right? So our sisters, they do not have to consider that receivable as part of their assets. If, for example, their husband said that I'll give you $10,000, normally in our Desi culture, the mahar muajjal is only given at the time of divorce, or when the husband passes away, she takes it from his asset. So she is not going to consider that outstanding mahar as a part of her assets. Similarly, outstanding bequest payment or inheritance. One of our family members passed away. They left behind a property back home in India, Pakistan, and it has not yet been distributed. We have a share inside there, but it hasn't been distributed yet. We haven't received our share yet, right? And in the meanwhile, our zakat date comes, we do not have to consider that outstanding inheritance payment as a part of our assets. We do not have to pay zakat on that until it comes into our ownership. So zakat will not be compulsory on a weak debt receivable until and unless one gets receipt of the asset. Zakat is not compulsory on such a debt for the previous years. It was outstanding. Okay. Next slide. Debt receivables. So as I mentioned, when you give a loan to somebody, you are liable for its zakat, and you have the two options. However, there are two exceptions. Bad debt. What does bad debt mean? Bad debt means that you loan money to somebody, he acknowledges that he owes you, but you have no hope of ever getting that money from him. Right? And there's no way that you are able to go to the court and make him pay you that money. That's considered a bad debt. Right? And a bad debt, there's no zakat on bad debt. Or for example, you loaned somebody money and that person denies it. You ask him for your money, he says, you didn't loan me any money. He said, yes, I did. He said, show me proof. And you don't have any proof. There's no documentation, there's no witnesses. That is considered a bad debt, and there's no zakat on bad debt. You can forget about that. And in the future, let's say 10 years down the line, he had a change of heart, right? And he decided to pay you back. In that case, you do not have to pay zakat for all the previous years. Now you will consider that a new asset. Okay? Next slide. Debt liabilities. That was all had to do with receivables. Now liabilities, money that we owe to other people, right? So liabilities are categorized in two categories: short-term liabilities, long-term liabilities. Short-term liabilities are money that we owe an individual or an organization or a finance company within the next 12 months. Those debts are deductible, right? Whatever payment we have to make in the next 12 months, that is deductible, that is a liability. And long-term debts, money that we owe after 12 months, right? Then that is not, for zakat purposes, that is not considered a liability. Otherwise, we'll have many people who are living very comfortable lives. They have huge houses, they go travel every year, they go on vacations, but because they have outstanding mortgage payments, $500,000, $600,000, everyone's going to say that I'm in debt, and no one's going to pay zakat, right? So for zakat purposes, we only deduct liabilities within the next 12 months. So your mortgage payments, right? Someone is taking out a mortgage. Again, I'm not going into the permissibility of mortgages or not. Let's assume it's a halal mortgage, right? And now your zakat date comes. You calculate all your assets. You have $50,000. And in the next 12 months, you're going to be making $10,000 of mortgage payments. And in mortgage payments, we only look at the principal amount. We don't look at the interest amount. From a Sharia perspective, there's that interest amount is not taken into account. Whatever principal amount we are paying in the next 12 months, and let's say that's $10,000, so we will deduct that as a liability. So from 50,000, we'll deduct 10,000 as a liability. We're left with 40,000. We pay zakat on the balance of 40,000. Okay. Similarly with OSAP, right? A lot of youngsters, they take OSAP from the provincial government and certain funds come from the federal government, and they only have to pay that back when they graduate, right? And the day they graduate, from that day, interest also starts to accumulate on that amount. However, if they pay it off before they graduate, then there's no interest, okay? So let's say I'm in my first year of university. I took $10,000 from OSAP, right? And I've used it to pay my tuition fees, right? Now my zakat date comes. I have $20,000 in the bank, right? Can I deduct that $10,000 as a liability? It depends. If my intention is to pay that $10,000 off in the next 12 months, then I can deduct it as a liability. If my intention is to pay $5,000 off in the next 12 months, then I will deduct $5,000. And if I have no intention of paying my OSAP in the next 12 months, then I don't deduct any of it as a liability, right? Same thing with a car finance. You purchased a car on 0% finance, right? When your zakat date comes, you have $50,000. You have a finance term of 84 months. You're not going to deduct that entire 84 months worth of payments. You only deduct the next 12 months worth of payments from your assets, and whatever the balance is, you pay zakat on that. Lease, no. Lease is considered like rent. It's month to month. So if the lease payment is already due, you can deduct that one lease payment that's coming up. Right? So debt liabilities, debts are deductible from your zakatable total if they are to be repaid in full within the next 12 months, debts which do not have to be paid in the next 12 months are not deductible. If debts are payable by installments, then 12 months debt is deductible only. Other deductible liabilities: outstanding basic living expenses which have not yet been paid for. Your zakat date comes and you've already received your Rogers bill, you've already received your Toronto Hydro bill or Markham Hydro bill or whatever, right? Or your internet bill, any bill that you've already received, the payment is already due. You can deduct that as a liability, right? Goods purchased on credit. You have taken receipt of goods but not yet paid for them and fully intend to pay the debt. You purchased something from a supplier, right? You've received the goods, and you got the invoice, but you haven't paid the invoice yet. That invoice is also a debt. On that zakat date, any invoices that are outstanding, you can deduct them from your liabilities. Outstanding salaries and payable service fees, right? On your zakat date, you owe money to your employers. You haven't paid them yet. You can also deduct that from your assets. Unpaid dowry to one's wife, right? You got married, you still haven't given your mahar yet, and you intend to give that mahar within the next 12 months, you can deduct that dowry amount, mahar amount from your assets. Personal loans, that which needs to be repaid within a year. You borrowed money from your friend, you intend to pay them within the next 10 months, 12 months, you can deduct that as a liability. Commercial loans, the entire loan cannot be deducted against assets, only 1 year's payments. You run a business, you take a commercial loan from the bank, line of credit, whatever, 12 months payments are deductible, not more than that. Right? Zakat on shares, stock market. Okay. And the first question here is it permissible to invest in the stock market? Again, there's many different opinions that float around. The widely accepted opinion, according to AOFI. AOFI is the accounting and auditing organization for Islamic finance, comprises of international scholars like the likes of Mufti Taqi Uthmani. They have said that it's permissible to invest in the stock market with certain conditions. Number one, the company that you're investing into, their main business is halal. So it's not a tobacco company or alcohol company or pornography company or something like that. Number two, that their interest-bearing debt is less than 33% of the total value of their company. So if the company value is $1 million, they don't have more than $333,000 of interest-bearing debt. Third condition is that more than 1/3 of their assets are not invested in interest-earning avenues. So again, if the company is worth $1 million, that company has not invested more than $333,000 in any interest-earning avenue. And last but not least, that any haram income that that company gets, right? So for example, a company, their core business is halal, but they have certain avenues of haram transactions that they're involved in. The income from that has to be less than 5%. So if these conditions are met, then you are allowed to invest in the stock market. Now, which companies meet these criteria, which companies don't meet these criteria, it's difficult for the average person to do that screening. We call it Sharia compliant screening. So that's why you have different applications out there on the internet. There's one called Islamically, there's one called Zoya, where some of them have a subscription fee. You subscribe and then you enter the ticker of the stock and it will calculate the financials and it will tell you whether it's compliant or not. They're not always 100% accurate, but in the absence of an alternative, that's probably the best thing that you can go with. Otherwise, there are Muslim investment professionals who manage your funds for you, and then they individually screen stocks. So you consult a local scholar or someone who is a professional in this field, and they tell you which companies you can invest in, companies you can't invest in. So we talked about this earlier. If you purchase a stock with the intention of trade, immediate selling, you're going to sell it as soon as you get the right price, right? Then zakat is wajib on the entire market value of the stock. However, if you purchased it just to hold as a storage of value, or to collect dividends, or you just purchased it, you'll see after a couple of years, see how that stock is doing, and then you'll end up selling it. In that case, zakat is not wajib on the entire market value of the stock, only the underlying zakatable assets. So the underlying zakatable assets are any cash that that company owns, any gold that company owns, any silver that company owns, and any business stock, any equities that that company owns, which they have purchased with the intention of selling. Now, again, it's very difficult to find out what the underlying zakatable assets are. You have to go through the financial documents, you have to go through the balance sheet. Mufti Faraz Adam, what he did was he analyzed 100 different companies on the stock market. He went through the balance sheet, and what he came up with a proxy, right? So he said that on average, right, any company, right, in the stock market, 25% of their total value will be zakatable, right? 25% of their underlying assets will be zakatable. So based on that proxy, if let's say the share value of a certain company, let's say Apple, is $1,000, right? So from that $1,000, $250 will be zakatable. Understand? So on each share that you own, $250 of that share is zakatable, which means you pay 2.5% of that 250. So if you're able to understand the balance sheets, then you have to do your homework and you have to analyze the balance sheet. If you're not able to understand the balance sheets, then you can use the proxy that Mufti Faraz Adam came up with. I think it was one before that. No, next one. All right, okay. Uh, Sorry? Yeah. Pension schemes. Common question, RRSP, right? We opened an RRSP, or we're provided a pension plan from our company, right? So pension schemes are of two types: defined contribution schemes and defined benefit schemes. The most common, 95% of pension schemes, are defined contribution schemes, and 5% of pensions are defined benefit schemes. That's mostly with the public sector government jobs, right? With defined contribution schemes, your money is taken, some of it is yours, some of it your employer matches, and then that money is invested into stocks, it's invested into mutual funds, it's invested into GICs and other types of securities. So first and foremost, we have to make sure that our RRSP portfolio is Sharia compliant. I know there are a lot of people that have been working with these pension providers, service providers like Manulife and Sun Life and some of these companies. They actually offer Sharia compliant RRSPs. So what you should do if you're working in a company that offers a pension, talk to the human resources department and tell them what your requirements are. If we get enough people in the Muslim community who demand Sharia compliant RSPs, then companies will start providing Sharia compliant pension schemes. So I believe either Sun Life or Manulife, one of them, just this year, they launched their first Sharia compliant RRSP. So assuming that our RRSP is Sharia compliant, right? We will pay zakat on the underlying zakatable assets of the RRSP, right? So again, we can go by the proxy that Mufti Faraz Adam came up with, 25%. So if your total portfolio is worth $100,000, your RRSP, there's no zakat on the entire $100,000. There's zakat on 25% of it, which is $25,000. So $25,000 is zakatable. You pay zakat on 2.5% of that. Does that make sense? Next slide. Sorry? On your zakat date. That's when you have to check. So anytime if you go, whichever your service provider is, if you go at any day, any time, you can check currently what the market value of your portfolio is. So when your zakat date comes, on that day, you'll check the value of your portfolio at that time. Yeah.
You mentioned about the RRSP, but for the pension, you mentioned it's a defined contribution.
RRSP is the self-directed one, or even the company provided, they call it the RRP.
Yeah, but the RRP,
Yeah.
where you are contributing as well as the company is contributing also.
Right. So because
Which portion the zakat will be?
on both,
Both.
on both. And the reason for that is that all that money that is invested into that account, right? Any profit or loss, you are enjoying that, right? So you are benefiting from any profit that takes place in that account, and you are incurring the risk of any loss that is taking place with those funds. So after your company has, matched your contribution or whatever, that is considered your ownership now. Understand? So you will pay zakat on that as well.
So actually, what you're saying that whatever the total value of that anniversary date, then you do a proxy of that of 25%.
25%.
2.5% of that.
2.5% of that. That's correct.
I'm sorry. Why would you take the 25% of the total?
Why? Like I said, because every company, the underlying zakatable assets will be different. Somewhere will be 10%, some will be 15%, some will be 30%. Now, to understand and read a company's balance sheet, especially with the, like if you invest in stocks, you know exactly these are the 10 stocks I've invested in. So with that, a person can actually go through the 10 stocks. But with the pensions, your money is invested in so many different companies, so many different mutual funds that you don't even have any idea which companies your money are invested into. So it's very difficult and practically impossible for a person to go and assess the balance sheet for each and every single company. So someone did homework and they analyzed 100 different companies, prominent companies that are on the stock market, and this is the 25% is the proxy that they came up with when they did the average, right? They came up with 25% and they added a couple of whatever number they came up with, they added a couple of percent as ihtiyat, out of caution. That's a safe and reasonable amount that we can assume will be the underlying zakatable assets for a company.
So it means that whatever you have the value of pension,
Sorry?
the value of the pension you hold, as of the calculation
Mm-hmm.
that date.
Mm-hmm.
So you just take the 25% of that
That
and
2.5% of that.
so my other question is, what is that ruling on the RESP?
Getting to that, inshallah. So RESP is similar, right? Sorry? Okay, so the brother asked a question about the pension schemes. So the answer was that with pension schemes, the total value of your pension scheme on your zakat anniversary date, right, will take 25% of that as zakatable, because based on a proxy where 25% of the underlying assets of the different companies that you've invested in will be considered zakatable, and you will pay zakat on 2.5% of that. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, because it depends on how well that portfolio performs. Sorry, could you repeat that question one more time? Yeah. Correct. You have what? So defined benefit. Right. So on a defined benefit scheme, it's actually considered a deferred wage. So the company, they look at the amount of years of your employment, how many hours you work, and they calculate based on that, they give you a lump sum when you retire. So that we consider, that is not considered, it's not considered an investment for you. That's considered a deferred wage. So your company is basically holding back some of your wage and they will pay you when you retire. And as you mentioned earlier, that there's no zakat on deferred wages. So there's no zakat on that plan. Yes, when you retire, you take that amount. At that time, it will form a part of your assets. Yeah. In what companies?
Option
Yeah.
other than defined contribution that you can buy a share of the company and then they also put the same amount, like you can put 6% and 6%.
Yeah. So it'll follow the same principle.
Keeping it and you are just holding on a purpose, but if you are not intending to sell it, then you know that only the
Exactly. If you purchase it with the intention of selling it immediately, zakat on the whole value. And if you purchase it with the intention of holding it, then zakat only on the underlying assets. With the RSP, Registered Education Savings Plan, right, where we can open that account for our children, it follows the same principle, right? So it's a savings account. Tax, you get the amount you put inside there, it's exempted from tax. You invest a certain amount of money inside there. The government matches it up to $500, and then those monies are then invested into either stocks or bonds or GICs or whatever the case may be. So again, Sharia compliance is very important. If you open an RESP through TD Bank, most likely it's not going to be Sharia compliant. But there are Sharia compliant service providers out there. I think Wealth Simple has an option. Manzil also offers a halal RESP option. There's a company called Sharia Portfolio. I believe if you Google them, you search them, they have Sharia compliant RESPs, RRSPs, right? So now in the RESP account, there's different types of funds, right? There's the money you invested, there's the money that the government matched inside there, and then there's the profit that is made from your investments, right? So with that, again, it comes back down to intention. When you deposit money into your child's RESP, are you retaining ownership over it or not? Or do you intend that I'm gifting this to my children? If your intention when you deposit money into the RESP is that now this belongs to my children, it's no longer yours. It belongs to your children now. Now, when they reach the age of 18 and they decide not to go to university, they decide not to go to college, you close that RESP down, you pull your money out, you have to pay tax on it now because your children didn't pursue higher education. You can't keep that money. You have to give it to your children because you intended that it belongs to them now. However, if you kept your milkiyat, you kept your ownership over it, right? Then in that case, right, until they reach the age of 18, 19, they pursue higher education, at that time, that money will be gone. It will go towards their university tuition or whatnot. But in the meanwhile, up until the age of 18, because you own that money, and it's still possible that at the age of 18, your child doesn't go to university, you get that money back. All those years, you have to pay zakat on it. Understand? Yeah. Right. From my understanding, once you've paid that insurance and it's gone to, even though it shows the balance on that sheet, it's out of your milkiyat now, so there's no zakat on there. Also, if you cancel, you get it back. Right. Sorry. Okay. Right. I'll have to think about that one. Inshallah, I can research that further and I'll pass the answer on to Mawlana Nabil, inshallah. No, we can skip all that. Paying zakat. Paying zakat. One should not delay in paying zakat. Okay. Once your zakat date comes, you've calculated your zakat. Let's say you calculate that I owe $500 in zakat. You have to make sure that that $500 is discharged prior to the next year. So you have 12 months to discharge that zakat. Whether you want to give that $500 all at once to one organization, that's up to you. Whether you want to, throughout the month of Ramadan, different organizations are coming to your masjid, you give every organization $50, $100, or you give it after the month of Ramadan. As long as you have intention of discharging it prior to the next zakat anniversary, you're okay. If you delay it past that, then you will be sinful. You still have to owe it, and you have to make tawbah and istighfar as well. When we give zakat, intention must be made at the time of giving zakat to a qualifying recipient or to one's agent, or at the time of separating zakat's funds from one's total assets. So when we give zakat, when we give it to the poor person, at that time, in our heart, we have to have the intention that this is zakat. If I give it with the intention of a gift, right? And later on I think to myself, hold on, I should have just made niyat of zakat. It's too late to change your intention now. The intention has to be made when you're giving it to the person. Similarly, sometimes we don't give the money directly to the poor person, but we give it to someone who is representing the poor person. So for example, the poor person, he has assigned someone to collect zakat on his behalf. Then at that time, when we give it to his agent, that person, his representative, we make niyat at that time. Right? And as soon as his agent, as long as the agent was assigned by the poor person, as soon as the agent, the representative, takes possession of those funds, the zakat is considered to be discharged. Whatever happens after that, that's not our responsibility. On the other hand, if I'm sending money to a poor person and I appoint someone to distribute the funds on my behalf. I have a cousin, he's going to Pakistan, and I give him my $500. I say, convert this into rupees and distribute it there however you wish. My zakat is not fulfilled by me giving it to my cousin. There's a donation box, Lillah zakat box in your masjid. By you putting the money inside that zakat box, your responsibility is not fulfilled. If my cousin runs away with that money, right? Or somebody steals that money from him, my zakat is not fulfilled. Na'udhu billah, somebody comes and steals money from the donation box or from the zakat box in the masjid. We've had incidents like that, right? And I come to know about it. That same day that I gave my zakat, that same night the box was stolen, right? My zakat is not fulfilled, right? I have to give that zakat again, because it's my responsibility to make sure that the zakat reaches the eligible recipient. If I give it to my cousin, right, I'm just the same way if somebody owed me money, right, and he said, I'm going to give it to so and so person to give to you, right, and he gives it to so and so person, and that person runs off with it. I'm going to say, I want my money. He said, no, well, no, I gave it to so and so person. That's your problem, not mine, right? So similarly, if we appoint someone to pay our zakat and they don't get it to the recipient, our zakat will not be considered fulfilled. Yeah. Hmm. They are what? Yeah. Hmm. 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 So there's two things here, right? Number one, first we have to understand that it is my primary obligation to pay my zakat. If I choose to trust somebody, I have to do my due diligence and I have to do my homework, and my heart has to be content that this person is going to discharge my zakat in the right manner. If I do that, and then I did my part, I trusted that person, and in the back end, that person didn't discharge my zakat in the right manner, and I didn't come to know of it either, right? There's just no way you find out. Then I'm excused. I'm ma'adhur. I didn't know. That person will be sinful. That organization will be sinful. Whoever mishandled the funds, misappropriated the funds, they will be the ones accountable to Allah Ta'ala on Yawmul Qiyamah. But if I come to get knowledge of it, that so and so person I gave my zakat to, they misappropriated the funds, they mishandled the funds, then in that scenario, since I have knowledge of that now, I will have to discharge my zakat again. Right? It is permissible to discharge somebody else's zakat from one's own wealth on condition that one has approval and acknowledgement from the other party. So we talked about that before. If a husband decides to give zakat on behalf of his wife, they talk about it, she gives permission, that's fine. Father gives zakat on behalf of his children, on his own behalf, right? As long as that mutual agreement is there, there's nothing wrong with that. Tamlik, transfer of ownership. Right. Zakat will only be considered to be paid when tamlik is found. Tamlik means the transfer of ownership from the zakat payer to a needy person. Tamlik will only take place with the following conditions. Tamlik means making somebody an owner. So in order for zakat to be fulfilled, a human being has to become the owner of those funds. What does that mean? Zakat is not fulfilled by giving the zakat to a hospital, giving it to an orphanage. When that orphanage or the hospital takes hold of those funds, that does not fulfill our zakat until that money comes into the ownership of someone who is eligible to receive zakat. Either it comes into his ownership or either it comes into the possession of somebody that he has, that poor person himself has appointed, right? So what does ownership mean? If something is in my ownership, that means I can do whatever I want with it and nobody can stop me. I can sell it if I want, I can eat it if I want, I can gift it to somebody else if I want. What does that mean? Let's say I have $500 of zakat that I have to discharge. So I decide that I'm going to cook a big daig of biryani, right? And I'm going to have a da'wat for all the poor and needy in Masjid Darul Iman, hall number 3. And we come over here and we serve the food. People take their foods on plates and they eat over here, right? Or they're allowed to come and take food from the pot, as they like. By that, zakat is not fulfilled. That is not called tamlik. That is called ibaha, where here's the food, you can eat as much as you want. Tamlik would be that I give the food in a pack to the poor person, I give a bag of rice to the poor person, or cooked food to the poor person in a container. Here, this is yours. You can do whatever you want with it now. Whether he decides to take it home and eat it, whether he decides to throw it in the garbage, whatever he wants to do with it, I can't exert or put any pressure on him to use it in a certain way. That is what tamlik means, right? The transfer must not be remuneration or consideration for services. So I have a poor person working for me back home in India. We have people who come, maids working in our houses. We have to pay them a salary. I cannot pay them a salary using zakat funds. The transferee, the recipient, must acquire position and become owner of the funds unconditionally. I can't put a condition on somebody that I'll give you this zakat money, but I want you to do so and so. Only if you do so and so, then I will give you zakat money. That is not correct. Yeah. Exactly. So we have to do our due diligence. We don't have to go and look into their financials and stuff like that. But apparently, by knowing their condition, outwardly, if it seems by your assessment is that this person doesn't seem like he has $600 of savings, right? Then you can give your zakat to that person. Yeah. Exactly. You're never going to be able to find out exactly how much that person has, right? That's why to a certain extent you can do your homework, or sometimes you just judge a person based on his apparent situation. You see he's homeless, for example, right? A person is homeless, he's being evicted from his home, or right, that sometimes that situation is enough for you to come to that conclusion that this person must not own it, must not have, this X amount of money. You can. So the brother asked, can you give zakat in advance of your zakat date? Yes, you can give. However, when your zakat date comes, you still have to calculate on your zakat date. And if there was any difference, then you have to offset it. So let's say you gave $500 in advance. When your zakat date comes, you realize that you actually have to pay $700. So you still have to give that difference of $200. If you gave extra, that would be considered nafil then.
Can you pay zakat or you can pay, sorry, not pay. Can you give zakat for the repair of a house
So can the question is,
of a person who's eligible?
right? So the question is that can you give zakat for a person to repair his house? So yes and no. You can give him zakat and tell him that I'm giving you this money, right? And I want you to use it to repair your house. However, after you make him owner of that money, right? Now, whether he uses it to repair the house or not, that's at his discretion. Another way, you could tell him that, you know what, go repair your house. He gets his house repaired, and now he owes the, somebody money, right? Now you tell him that I want you to appoint him as your wakil. I want you to appoint him as your representative. You give the person he owes money, you give him the funds. As soon as you give him the funds, the zakat is discharged now because he had appointed him as his representative, and then that person can use the money to offset his invoice. Right? So that's the way around it.
I'm asking this question is somebody asked me this. Somebody said that you cannot give zakat money for the repair or the construction of the house.
Yeah, like
That point of view I'm asking.
yeah, so I understand. So as long as somewhere along the line ownership takes place, right? So the person who you're talking about, who owns the house, the money enters his ownership, either by him taking possession of the money, or by someone that he has appointed takes possession of the money. As long as that tamleek takes place somewhere in between, the purpose, the maqsad can be anything. Understand? The main thing is tamleek. Yeah. Sorry, same thing like, can you give money for someone's ilaj, right? Someone has a hospital bill or something like that. So you can't, by you giving the zakat money and just paying off the bill directly, that won't fulfill the zakat because no ownership took place, right? However, if the poor person appointed someone, right, to represent them, and you have an agreement with that person that I'm going to give you the money, let him appoint you as his representative, I'm going to give you the money, and once I give you the money, you go and pay his bills. Yeah.
Someone owns a house, he's living in a house, and he has a property on rent, but he has huge medical expenses. So is he considered eligible for receiving?
Right. So, yeah, I understand. Yeah.
Situation that like sometimes a person is very well off or something, but in his family there is some cancer happen or you had a huge expense, right?
100%. Yeah. So let's talk about this. On this page, they talk about the recipients who are eligible to receive zakat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's mentioned 8 different people in the Quran who are eligible to receive zakat. Some of those categories don't exist in our times, right? From them, the fundamental recipient of zakat are the poor and needy. What is the definition of poor and needy? Those who do not own any zakatable assets nor surplus assets. If you see that's underlined, nor surplus assets beyond their personal assets that equal the nisab. What does that mean? So when we want to determine whether a person is eligible to receive zakat or not, number one, we will look at their cash. Is their cash equal to the nisab? Do they have gold and silver that equals to the nisab? Right? And the fourth thing that we check is, do they have any surplus assets that equal the nisab? What is surplus assets? Surplus assets are things that a person owns, but they don't serve any primary function, they're not considered a need. Okay? So let's say a person, for example, has 2 cars, right? One car is a need. The second car that he has is just for leisure, just for show, whatever the case may be, right? That will be considered surplus. A person has a computer. One computer is a necessity. He has children. Children go to school. They all need laptops. So 4 laptops for him is considered a necessity. But he has 10 laptops. So those 6 extra laptops are considered surplus, right? A person has one home which he lives in. It's a huge home, it's a mansion. But he lives in that house, is using it, his family is using it. That is considered a necessity. Then he has an extra home, a second home, that's just for investment purposes or is just sitting there for guests. That is considered surplus. That is beyond necessity. Now, the value of that extra house, the value of that extra car, the value of those extra laptops exceed the amount of nisab. So that disqualifies a person from accepting zakat. Understand? Because he owns assets that are beyond basic necessity. Those things are not in use, they're just sitting there. So ideally, he should sell those things first to pay off any expenses. He's not really poor. He owns, a house worth $100,000. So just because he doesn't have any cash, gold, and silver, right, does not mean that he's poor, because he has surplus assets, right, that are worth a lot. Yes, if he has so much debt, he has so much debt on his shoulder that if you were to take into consideration his surplus assets, but his debt is so much that it depletes all those assets, understand? Then in that case, a person will be considered eligible to receive zakat. So let's say his extra house is worth $100,000, but his hospital bill is $200,000, right? So if you minus 200,000 from 100,000, that puts him in minus. In that case, he will be eligible to receive zakat.
One question I have
Yeah.
for the recipient. If a person is collecting funds for somebody, on behalf of somebody, and they are assessing that the person to be eligible, and they're collecting funds to buy a house for that recipient, can your zakat money is eligible to purchase a house?
Yeah. So can you purchase a house? So let's say you purchase zakat money, you collect zakat money for somebody, and can you purchase a house for them? Yes. You can use the zakat money to purchase a house, and then that house has to be given in the ownership of that poor person. So essentially what the brother is trying to say is that you don't always have to give cash in zakat. If I have $500 zakat, which is farad on me, I don't have to pay my zakat by cash. I can buy clothing and distribute the clothing to the poor. I can buy medication and distribute that medication amongst the poor. I can buy, for example, certain things that a person needs to start his business. I can use that and then give that in the ownership of the poor person. Right? If someone is in need of an appliance, a fridge, an AC, right? You can purchase the AC, you can purchase the fridge, and give that in the ownership of the poor person.
You have to notify the recipient of this.
No. So, good question. Do you have to notify the recipient that I'm giving you zakat? No, you don't have to. As long as you have the intention in your heart, you can tell him that you're giving him a gift. You can tell him you're giving him Eid, whatever the case may be. It does not have to be made clear that you're giving him zakat. No, even sadaqah, zakat, you don't have to tell, because it hurts a person's dignity, a person's honor. A person doesn't want to accept zakat. A person will find it difficult to accept zakat, but he will happily accept a hadiyah. Understand? So it's not necessary to tell someone that you're giving them zakat. Based on their condition, right? Or somebody that you trust, who knows the family personally, knows that they're going through a very difficult time. You trust that third person. Understand? So to a certain level, there will be, i'timad. You will have to make your decision based on trust to a certain extent.
Whoever is collecting funds on their behalf, it's his duty to assess that the person is really eligible for whom you are collecting funds.
So if you're collecting funds,
If I'm collecting funds, it's my job to make sure I have to do due diligence because I'm collecting funds from other people.
100%. So if you're collecting funds on behalf of so and so family, it's your responsibility to do your due diligence. Now you ask me, for example, that I'm collecting for so and so. I also have to do my due diligence on you. Do I trust you or not? If I don't trust you, I'm not going to give you my zakat funds. So I'm going to place my trust in you. Let's say down the line, na'udhu billah, you ran away with the funds. I'm not saying you, but just an example, right? Then in that case, my zakat is not going to be fulfilled. Understand? Yeah. Yes, 100%. So obviously, they say charity starts from the home, right? So poor people within our family, within our aqarib, within our relatives. Then, if our family relatives are all taken care of, people within our city, right? Local people who we know are eligible to receive zakat, they have more haqq upon us than other people. Right. So that's all coming. Sorry. Next slide. Yeah.
Speaking of madrasa,
Yeah.
do you give to the students, or do you give madrasas under need of renovation or construction?
Let's get to that as well, inshallah. Actually, before we move on, I'll just mention this here as well. It's a bit common question, right? Administrative fees. So a lot of Islamic organizations, they collect zakat from the Muslim community, but they don't have 100% zakatable policy, right? 10%, 15%, 20% of the funds they use to offset administrative costs. So because they're a big organization, they have media costs, they have people working for them, they have employees, they have to pay their employees a salary. And the Muslim community, to these organizations, mostly give our zakat. We don't give lillah funds, we don't give sadaqah funds. Now, from all the funds they're receiving, sadaqah lillah is only 5%. That is not enough for them to run their organization. So what they do is they take from the zakat funds and they're paying off, staff and people from those funds. According to the overwhelming majority of scholars, in our days, Islamic organizations who have launched themselves, who are not authorized on behalf of an Islamic government, are not considered valid recipients of zakat money. Otherwise, if that was the case, everybody's going to start opening charities because people know that the Muslim community has to give zakat. There's millions and millions of dollars that are going in zakat from Toronto, right? So a person has nothing better to do. Let me open an organization. I'll open an organization. I'll start asking people for zakat funds. I'm doing a project in Pakistan. I'm doing a project in Yemen. And I'm doing a project in Syria. I'm going to get all these zakat funds, and I'll take a salary from there for myself, right? Or just how this brother said that I'm collecting on behalf of so and so person. He's going to think to himself that I'm collecting zakat money, so let me take a cut as well, right? So Allah Ta'ala talks about al-amilina alayha, those who work for zakat. They are eligible to receive zakat. That is in a specific context in an Islamic government where the government assigns certain people. They employ and hire certain people to go and collect zakat from the citizens of that country, right? So then from that zakat funds, a portion of that can go to those who are employed by the Islamic government. And the reason for that is the Islamic government has wilaya and has guardianship over all the citizens of their country. So they are by default representatives of the poor and needy that are living inside their country. So Islamic relief organizations are not allowed, according to the overwhelming majority of scholars, to use zakat funds to offset administrative costs. Yeah, definitely, you should be asking that, right? When you're giving money to an Islamic relief organization, right, a charity organization, you should definitely be asking. Sorry?
I mean, they do ask that information in which part you want to contribute.
Yeah, if they're asking you that, would you like to give something on top, right? Would you like to, what do you call it, donate 15% towards administrative costs, and you give that on top, then that's fine, right? Because now your 100% is going to the zakat, and you've covered the administrative cost.
Big companies like IDRF, Islamic Relief Welfare Center, do you know by the
I don't know specifics, but I do know that this is common in this industry, right? So you would have to do your due diligence for specific organizations. Yeah. Uh-huh. Right. So as brother Junaid mentioned, that a lot of these organizations, if you make it clear to them that I'm giving you my zakat, but I want 100% of it to be utilized to a zakatable purpose, then they will do so. And you can ask them that if there's any admin costs, I'll cover it on top of that. Same thing when you're paying your zakat using a credit card, right? When you pay $100 using a credit card, the organization on the back end, they don't get $100. They get $98, $97. The credit card company takes a 3% fee. So only $97 of yours are going to zakat. So you have to make sure that you're putting in a couple of extra percent on top if you're paying your zakat using a credit card. Yeah. Yeah, 100%. So definitely. So just by what I'm saying is that just by you giving that money to that organization, your obligation not fulfilled. But obviously, there's a certain level of trust that you trust that that company is. You only gave it to that organization because you trusted that they will use your funds appropriately. Understand? So if you don't trust that organization, you shouldn't be giving them your zakat in the first place. Thanks. Yeah. Mu'allafatul qulub again is a category that is abrogated. Right? It was abrogated in the time of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. This specific category was existed in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but during the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, it was abrogated. So it's no longer an eligible recipient. Ji? Okay. So last slide, those who cannot take zakat, the following cannot receive zakat. Number one, general welfare projects, hospitals, madrasas, and I'll come back to that in a second. Construction projects for mosques, hospitals. So zakat money can't be used towards the building or towards construction or towards repair. The descendants of Abbas, Harith, Ja'far, and Aqil radiallahu anhum, meaning the family of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Sayyids. They are not eligible to receive zakat. Rather, it is the collective responsibility of the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam that out of our love for Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam and his family, we take care of the sadat and we take care of the descendants of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam through our voluntary sadaqah, voluntary charity, through hadiyah and through gifts and things like that. A rich person who owns more than the nisab, one's wife or husband, one's parents, grandparents, great grandparents, one's children, grandchildren, great grandchildren. So we call them usul and furu'. You can give zakat to your brother or sister, right? Employees as remuneration. Again, you have to pay somebody as a salary. You can't use your zakat money to pay their salary. And prisoners, obviously, if they're not eligible to receive zakat. If they're poor and needy and they're eligible to receive zakat, then you can give prisoners. What they mean is that how they have soldier exchange, prisoner exchange. To release somebody from prison, right? You cannot give zakat. because that condition of tamleek didn't take place, right? So that's
So that they, even if they don't collect any fees for that service.
even if they don't collect fees, because the condition of tamleek is not mentioned. Yes, they use that hina that we talked about earlier, right? Where somehow that money enters the ownership of those poor kids, and then the organization takes it back. Those children willingly give that money back, then the organization can use it however they want.
So in the case of madrasas, for example,
Yeah.
the expenditure on admin expenditure of lighting and heating and this and the other
Yeah.
of the staff emoluments, they should not be covered or they cannot be covered under the law.
All the way.
They cannot be and they should not be covered under the law.
So the entire budget that the madrasa says that this is our yearly budget, not that entire budget is. That's because the reality is that in India, Pakistan, a lot of these madrasas. Sorry?
That they are not poor, but they said that because of our then we are because we for students they said that since we are paying the student, a student is one of a category that who is actually a student of Islam or something.
Yeah, the student, yeah, not just students. The students have to be poor. That's what I'm saying. That we can't make a general statement that all of them are right, all of them wrong. We have to do our individual homework with regards to individual organizations. Not all of them have the same policy, right? So I think that brings us to the end of the presentation. Inshallah. Yeah.
Suppose I have a $5,000 and I'm supposed to pay zakat on it, but before my end of the year, I'm giving a gift to my son or daughter. So I don't have to pay zakat on it, right? But he or she has to pay zakat on it if he or she
Owns it on their zakat date.
if they are the Nisab holder. If they are not the Nisab holder, then they have to wait from that day to the end of the year.
End of the year, correct. Yeah.
It has to be a Muslim.
Recipient has to be a what? Muslim, correct. Yeah. Zakat, the recipients of zakat have to be a Muslim. Voluntary sadaqah, lillah that you just put for voluntarily, that can be given to non-Muslims as well. But zakat has to go to Muslims. Yeah. Alaikum salam.
Firstly, thank you so much for this. It's really informative.
Yeah.
I have a question. It's on behalf of my brother. If he purchases a house
Mm-hmm.
with the intention of selling it, and it's a pre-construction, so it hasn't been built yet, and he intends on selling it prior to it being built, like before the closing date, does he have to pay zakat?
Yeah, on the raw value of it. So it's not whatever the current value, he'll have to get an estimation done on what it would be worth in the current state that it's in, and he'll pay zakat on that. Yeah, cool.
Just one question. I'm kind of still trying to get my head wrapped around zakatable assets, right? So I understand that back in the day when zakat became wajib, that gold and silver were recognized form of currency with the cash equivalent, dinar or whatever, right? And let's say maybe gemstones were not, but now they are. So gemstone actually has value today.
Yeah.
So what I'm struggling with is, a little old lady with one gold ring is to pay zakat, and some rich guy with a diamond full of, bag full of diamonds doesn't, right?
Right.
So why?
I mean, the same thing can be said about properties as well. Person has 5 properties that he just owns for the sake of it. No zakat on there, but there's zakat on 1 ring of gold, right? That's because Sharia has considered gold and silver to be thaman khilqi, they called it, meaning by default from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it was meant to be used as a form of exchange, right? It doesn't have any other use, right? It's made to exchange. The same way cash, right? It's sorry. Not even the money. It's the purpose of it. What's the same way cash? Cash in itself is just paper, right? It has, but what is its purpose? It's a form of exchange. So the same way Sharia recognizes gold and silver as a form of exchange, whether it's in the form of a ring, whether it's in the form of jewelry, whether it's in its raw form. Okay? Not in gold and silver.
For example, like I'm not buying gold, but I'm buying like diamonds, right?
Yeah.
Its intention was to say I want to get away from the zakat. What's my intention? So, for example, you said right at one point.
100%. If someone is buying certain things like that, right, only with the intention of avoiding zakat, right, and not to pay zakat, then that is something that's between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But at the same time, right, Sharia has also encouraged us to invest our wealth as well, right? So Sharia doesn't like the fact that people's money just stays stagnant, it just sits there. Sharia wants constant flow of money. Sharia wants us to be investing our money in different avenues, different sources. And that's why it's encouraged. That's why zakat is levied on gold and silver. So it just doesn't sit there. You're using that money. Instead of money just sitting there and appreciating or depreciating, Sharia wants us to use that money, spend it in different avenues, so that wealth is always circulating. Right? Yeah, I'll get to that. But cryptocurrencies, same thing. Cryptocurrencies, there's different types of tokens. One is the cash token, like Bitcoin, that is used as a form of currency, right? So scholars say with regards to that, if you purchase it with the intention of trade, entire value is zakatable. If you purchase it to hold, right, then on the underlying zakatable assets, on depending on the type of
Same thing could be for NFTs or even artwork.
same thing with NFTs. If you purchased an NFT with the intention to trade, sell immediately, full value is zakatable. Otherwise, only the underlying zakatable assets.
Same case with people buying paintings and other artwork.
Exactly.
Would the 25% also apply to crypto? Or no? Because it's not a company that's holding assets.
With crypto, it depends what it's representing, right? Whatever the underlying assets are, that will be zakatable. But I don't know if I don't think that 25% proxy will apply to cryptocurrency. I don't think that much research has been done on cryptocurrencies.
That sounds like treat it as a cash then, equal to cash, crypto?
No. So if it was cash, then its entirety would be zakatable, not only the underlying assets, right? If it was treated as cash, then in cash you don't look at underlying assets, right? It's zakatable in its entirety. So we look at it as an asset.
I have one more question about the stock. So
Yeah.
the shares, you said, a company's share, you take the underlying value, 25%, and then you pay zakat. What about the dividends?
Dividends is just like income.
So
So you add it to your cash. If you have it on your zakat date,
dividend, even if you have withdrawn or you have let it grow within part of the share, it's still be
if you let it grow, then it's a share now, right? Then it's invested in the share. If it's in its cash form, then you will add it to the rest of the cash that you own.
okay.
You get it? Yeah.
Last question. Can you please just repeat again for the RESP?
Yeah.
So you said,
RESP depends on the parent's intention.
yeah. So if the intention is, that money will be used for the university or the college fee. But at the same time, you mentioned, that you have to pay zakat because we don't know if the child if the child, we don't know if the child will not go to the university. So then we should pay the zakat.
Yeah.
If the intention is there that will be used, and at this point, I know the child will be going to the university, and the money will be used for the university fee. So in this situation,
The intention is not about what it's going to be used for. Intention is about ownership. Parents, is he retaining his ownership or not? If he retains his ownership, he will pay zakat on it, regardless if that student goes to university.
we should pay the zakat.
Sorry?
Until that,
If you retain your ownership. And if you give up your ownership, and your intention when you put it inside that account is now this money belongs to my child, you don't pay zakat anymore. Sorry? After the child reaches the age of bulugh. Yeah.
just like that, like you mentioned about the pension and RRSP. Because this when you just have that Rrsp is deposited or saved in Masjid somewhere, either mutual fund or the shares in someone company. So in that it will be the same rule will apply that you take the 25%.
Exactly. You will use the proxy. Correct. Jazakumullah khair.
Jazakallah khair, Mufti Saab. I think you gave us more than expected. SubhanAllah. Allah reward you. Allah bless you. And honestly, we thank Mufti Saab for accepting our invitation and coming here and doing this phenomenal presentation. And a lot of our audience for watching on live also. So brothers and sisters, we're taking benefit from home. And brothers and sisters, if you're watching us, so please stay in touch with our social media handles. Donate generously for Masjid Darul Iman for the programs, inshallah. You'll keep seeing these beneficial programs. And Jazakallah khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.